Robert Frost's sonnet, Acquainted with the Night, is interesting on a variety of levels. One of them is, of course, structurally. When we look at it, we see that it doesn't look like other sonnets we've seen, Petrarchan's with their octave and sestets, or Shakespearean ones with their quatrain, quatrain, quatrain couplet. Instead, we have what might be called triplets, or more formally, tercets, is what they're called, three-line stanzas. It's following a rhyme scheme that's kind of Shakespearean and kind of not at the same time. It's imitating another Italian form of poetry. It's kind of laying it on top of a sonnet called terza rima, which means third rhyme or three rhymes. And we can see that we have like little surrounding rhyme things. We have ABA, night, rain, light. The word rain is trapped between two words that rhyme, and then the word rain comes down and becomes the outer locking for the next set of three, lane and explain. And beat is trapped in the middle. Then beat moves down and becomes feet and street. Then cry is trapped in the middle. And something happens there that's a little bit off. When we look at the rhyme scheme, it says ABA, BCB, CDC, DAD, AA. And what we notice is that there's three of almost everything, not counting the A's. There's 5 A's, where he ends with a rhyming couplet. And the A was the rhyme that started the poem, the ite rhyme. And that's kind of important since the poem is also interesting as a sonnet. One of our favorite questions is where does it begin, where does it end? This poem ends where it began. It really kind of goes nowhere. It's almost like a circular poem. But a beautiful poem with lots of different elements of poetry for us to look at. Notice right away we see that it has anaphora, a fancy way for saying repetition. We have a speaker, excuse me, a speaker who kind of just opens the poem with declarations. He says, I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. So he never really says that he's lonely or sad. Instead, it's like powerfully suggested by the imagery of the poem. He's walking, and he doesn't say it, but it seems clearly that he's walking alone, and there's nothing sadder than rain. He's walking out in the rain, and he walks back in the rain. And he seems to be a person who moves to the extreme of things. He has outwalked the furthest city light, is what he stresses there. So he's gone to the edge of things, almost as if he's wanting something or wanting to break through to something new. We have our fourth repetition. I should have lowered this a little bit. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes unwilling to explain. Sorry, there's a lot more repetitions than I even thought. There's 5 times he says that he has done something. He's passed by a policeman and dropped his eyes, unwilling to explain. Robert Frost is good at leaving us at the edge of mystery, not telling us exactly what it is to explain. Maybe to explain why he's walking. What are you doing out so late at night? Why are you alone? Are you up to, funny business or something like that might be what the watchman is up to. We return in the third tercet to more declarations. I have stood still, and we notice that alliteration, right? Sort of creates a little bit of beauty in this sad poem. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. Now, this is a really wonderful stanza because you can see the sort of disassociation the speaker has with his own body. He has stood still and stopped the sound of feet. He doesn't say the sound of my feet. He's just almost like those feet are not even his. He just hears the sound of feet. He stops them. And we're in the world of auditory imagery now. He hears, again, at a distance, far away, an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. Critics have wondered what he meant by an interrupted cry. A lot of people think it's like the houses or between whatever the origin of the sound is and where our speaker is. He hears this cry over some houses from another street. And you would think this would be a volta, and it does sort of undercut what he just said. The cry might be, somebody calling out his name or somebody wanting to connect with him. But this cry had nothing to do with him. There's a lot of this in a lot of Frost poetry where something happens, then you think it has something to do with you, but it has nothing to do with you. The world is quite indifferent in Robert Frost's cosmology. So let's start right here. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet, when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. The poem is mostly just physical description and imagery up to this point, and declaration. But it gets tremendously sad here because the sound that he hears, the cry, the person calling a name, it wasn't to call him back. It wasn't to say goodbye. And then we have we go back to visual imagery, a luminary clock against the sky. Some people see this as the moon. Some people see it as, like, if you've seen Back to the Future, sort of the clock tower that's in the middle of Times Square. It's at an unearthly height, though. It makes me think that it's probably the moon. It's a luminary, and luminary implies moon. A clock against the sky, but it proclaims the time was neither wrong nor right. The cry doesn't speak to him at all, and the moon is saying to him almost nothing as well. What does it mean to say the time was neither wrong nor right? In this context, it seems to mean that there's nowhere to go, and there's nowhere to be, and there's no time to be there. There's no right or wrong time, it's just time is passing. And we return, repetitious, the poem is sort of trapped in a circle, almost claustrophobically, that he has been one acquainted with the night. Notice he never says that he's depressed. That word is not in the poem. And yet it's powerfully suggested through the use of repetition, through the use of imagery, through the use of auditory sounds, and a sort of plain-spoken poem. And interestingly, doesn't seem to have a volta like we'd expect a sonnet to do. Instead, it just seems like a sad cry. How does it begin and end? It begins and ends exactly the same. What's the most important word in the poem? It might be night, since night suggests sort of depression and darkness. And where's the shift in the poem? It doesn't seem to have a shift in the poem. It's just all one piece, a sort of tonal sadness.